Are you searching for teacher CPD that leads to change, illuminates best practice and inspires your staff? Well, look no further. InnerDrive's Teacher CPD Academy is just what you need. The Teacher CPD Academy now also includes our Teaching Unpacked series, with Doug Lamoff exploring and analysing what great teaching looks like in the classroom. Email us now at tnt@innerdrive.co.uk to grab a free trial. tnt@innerdrive.co.uk.
Welcome to TandTeaching, the educational podcast you can listen to with a cup of tea. My name's Arthur, and with me, as always, he's here. It's Mike Harrowell. Hi, Mike.
There's no variety in your introductions, is there?
No. If it works, keep doing it. And if it doesn't work, keep doing it anyway, which feels perfect for this episode, Mike.
Yeah, it does, Arthur. Brilliant. Yeah, episode 3 on Oracy. What are we talking about?
What are we talking about? Well put, Mike. So episode 1, if you haven't listened to it, go back. We spoke about kind of the role of Oracy in education, why it's important, why we should be bothered about it. Episode 2, we spoke about how we can bring it into a school level. So whether that's SLT or in our departments, how we can get this thing moving. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about it in our classroom, our teaching spaces, lots of practical strategies and tips on what to do. But luckily, Mike, we are joined once again by Yamina. Yamina, welcome back.
Hello, thanks for having me.
I'm so grateful you've joined us once again for part 3 of this mini-series all about Oracy. So, as I said, we're going to be talking about teaching tips today, really, for this. And there's loads of ways we could structure this, Yamina, but I thought we'd talk about, I'm a classroom teacher. I want to bring Oracy kind of into my classroom, and I'm going to break this down to things that I can do before my lesson, the things I should maybe do in my lesson, and the things maybe I can think about after my lesson to see how it went. So I'm interested. I'm sitting down to plan a lesson, whatever, and I want to make sure I'm doing all that Oracy stuff that's going to help all my students. Yamina, I need some help. Tell me what to do.
Just the fun bit. We talk about, like, I suggest intellectual preparation, which is what you're saying, is an opportunity to really think about the kind of key milestones in your classroom, what you're aiming to achieve by the end of that lesson, and how you're going to do it. And what we don't want is obviously just to be a bolt-on, right? We want it to be something that gives the students the opportunities to express their ideas, articulate their ideas through that speaking, listening, and oral communication. And we know when you look at the EEF that can have real significant impact for young people, both in primary and in secondary. So the first thing I would say is actually planning for talk. So thinking about preparing things like sentence stems, giving students every opportunity to be able to articulate and express their ideas explicitly. Planning for that means planning sentence talks. We can't just make the assumption that they'll know how to express their ideas unless we give them the tools. So things like habits of discussion from Doug Lamoff's Teach Like a Champion actually give us strategies on how we might do that. So explicitly telling students what they need to do to show that they're listening. So you might be tracking the speaker, you might be nodding along. When you answer a question, you might say, building on Mike's response, I would like to add that, and rephrasing what Mike said and then building on Mike's response, and actually explicitly teaching them, planning for that in your own lesson. So part of your intellectual preparation when you're planning a lesson is to write down the sentence stems that students will know on a PowerPoint slide, on a worksheet, however you kind of share your lesson with the students, and then planning opportunities for them to be able to use those explicitly and giving them feedback on that actually, and saying things like, oh, well done, I really love the fact that you use this particular sentence stem to build on Mike's previous point. So, and maybe even rewarding them because they're doing something that's what we want to do is build in that praise. So there's a culture of talk in the classroom. So it's not just a bolt on. So you're planning for that through things like sentence stems. I also will obviously talk about talk, turn and talk and think, pair, share, because those are classic strategies. You know, if you ain't broke, don't fix it is my number one rule when it comes to teaching and learning. But what we can do is upskill or up-level some of those strategies. You know, having observed so many lessons in the last, 15 years of teaching, you know, in different capacities, from being an ECT mentor to being a lead mentor to, you know, being the head of teaching and learning. One of the key things I find is that there's always, you know, in some less effective classrooms, students are passengers. In those, they'll say turn and talk and then just assume that we make the assumption that students are going to do what we told them to do. As somebody with ADHD, I really challenge that. Unless somebody is telling me and holding me to account, I will do whatever I want. I will talk about nonsense. So actually finding ways to hold students to account is really important, and planning for that in advance. So it's having things like talk partners. And I know some people will say that's a primary school thing. You don't have to call it talk partners in secondary. You can call it whatever you want. Just turn and talk, or, person sitting next to you. It doesn't really matter. But I talk about like being specific in your planning about who's going to do what. So having roles for every single student and making that explicit in your planning. So, okay, when I do turn and talk, I'm actually scripting it. I'm a massive fan of scripting, particularly as a novice teacher, like writing down, okay, when I say, I want them to discuss how Priestley presents ideas about a social class in the spectacles in this particular quote, on this particular extract, I'm going to say exactly this. When I say go, you are going to allocate yourself person A, person B. Person A, you're going to talk about this part of the quote. Person B, you're going to talk about this part of the quotation. And then I'm going to ask you to share what your talk partner said. So there's a level of accountability. But in terms of preparing for that, actually scripting that in advance is really, really important, I would say. And I think that works really well for turn and talk, but it also works really well for strategy like think, pair, share as well.
I think everything you said, what's coming across to me is it's not the idea of just saying, I'm going to do this. It's I'm going to do this, and then like actually planning how that is going to work. So whether that's having something that you're going to give out, whether it's something you're going to have on the board, or whether it's how you're going to structure it, or you're going to model it. But that all comes part of the plan. Because I know definitely in my early teaching career, I'd say like, I'm going to do some think, pair, share. Right. Well, that's that plan. Don't need to worry about any more of that. Whereas what I actually need to do is like, think, pair, share is the strategy I'm going to use. But explicitly, how am I actually going to structure this with my students? Mike, you work with loads of teachers doing kind of lots of observation stuff. I'm interested if you got anything you would do kind of before that lesson of kind of building what Yamina said there.
Yeah. Building upon what Yamina just said. That was a sentence then, Arthur.
Thanks.
You're welcome. I would say, teachers when they're planning their lessons, it's just not what you're teaching, it's how you're teaching it. So being really, looking at each episode within your lesson and going, right, what do I want to get out of this activity or discussion? How am I going to get that out of it? It's not just, I'm going to teach them some information, then they're going to do a question, then we're going to review the question, then I'm going to teach them some more information. We've got to be more granular with what we're doing, and we've got to start thinking about increasing that thinking and participation ratio, which is, what Yamina is talking about there is making sure no student's a passenger. Everyone is thinking and engaging in discussion and learning the whole time in our lesson, whether that's, I'm engaging independently on some writing or I'm engaging together with someone else. And I think that's what the best teachers do, is they're constantly thinking about how am I going to deliver this to get the best possible results out of the lesson.
And then what's interesting as teachers is we go in with great plans and then the lesson begins. So we've planned for all this. I go into my lesson, Yamina, and I want to be consciously bring this in. So we've kind of alluded to some of the ideas there, but kind of going more from what is happening in my lesson right now perspective. What are your recommendations for teachers in that respect?
Yeah, so I think this is where it's really important to explicitly teach those habits of discussion. So, and sometimes it's really easy, like Mike was saying earlier about kind of having something like STAR or SLAN or SLATE to explicitly teach what effective listening and speaking might look like or sound like. But actually having things like, using things like habits of discussion. So with habits of discussion, you're explicitly teaching things like how to speak in a full sentence or listening to understand and what that might sound like, what that might look like in every form. But also it can mean things like giving students a role. So when you're doing a group discussion, so for example, some teachers might do, okay, we're going to discuss, this particular topic. We're going to discuss this particular thing in the lesson right now. And we're going to spend 5 minutes discussing it. You're going to talk about it in your groups, go for it. And actually have no sense of accountability and just letting the students talk. And as young people, they are going to lose direction. That's just normal. I mean, as adults, we do it, let's be honest, in CPD sessions. Someone goes, okay, talk about this particular topic. Let's not, And as somebody who's led on teaching and learning, it hurts, but it's true. Not everyone's going to stay on task. So actually having that accountability. So habits of discussion gives roles out. So this is why I love it, because so you put students into groups of 4, and then each person will have a role. The first person in the discussion will be the instigator. They essentially start the discussion off, and you give them sentence stems like, I would like to start by saying. Then you'll have the second person who's the builder. Their job is to develop the idea that the instigator starts off with. The third person is the challenger. They're the person who presents another idea, potentially an alternative idea or a challenging idea. to disagree with that first person's or the builder's idea. And the fourth person in the group is a summarizer. So they will literally be listening because they're listening to understand. And their job is to literally summarize those key points. And by doing that, each person is then accountable in the group. They're not just talking about it, without any direction. They're talking about whatever topic that you've asked them to talk about, whatever discussion point it is, in a really structured way. So I think that's one of the first kind of strategies I think works in any subject. You're giving each student a role in that classroom, in that group, to be able to discuss. And then it's really specific as well. It's not just, you're all going to have to talk and you're all going to have to share. Each person has a specific role. And by having things like sentence stems on the board or on a worksheet, they all know what their part is. And I think that's one of the scariest parts probably of like being asked to give feedback as well, is that you don't sometimes know what you're going to give feedback on if you don't have a specific role. Whereas if you say, right, Arthur, you're going to be the instigator, so if I ever ask you for feedback, that's the bit of feedback I want you to give, okay? That's your job. And so you're setting students up for success rather than setting them up for failure. That's one of the first kind of strategies I would share as well.
What I like about this, it's clearly telling the students what you want the outcome to be, but kind of letting them kind of lead that way. And I think little things like that, you're exactly right by giving roles out. We do it in maths sometimes. Some people, the questioner and the person writing down, one thing I really like in maths is the person is the scribe. So you tell your partner what to do, but the scribe write down exactly what they say. So they're going to have to be really listening, but also then the person talking be like, well, that actually isn't the notation I wanted you to write. Why have you written? Oh, wait, I'm saying that. So maybe I'm thinking about this wrong. And they kind of see a representation of what they're saying. And we all know it's like when you speak something and maybe you see a transcript of what you're saying, like, oh, it's not actually kind of the idea I wanted to convey there. Mike, any top tips for teachers in their lessons?
No, I wanted to talk about what Yamina just spoke about. I love that. Everyone's actively engaged in speaking and listening, clearly defined roles. It creates a safe space. A group of four is a safe space. And they're only focused on what they're doing, but they're listening to the whole discussion at the same time. So, yeah, I love that strategy.
It's dilemma.
So we planned our great lesson. It's gone really well, or maybe it hasn't gone really well. And we know what it's like, the hustle and bustle after that lesson. I get some time to reflect, whether it's kind of before the next class comes in, walking down the corridor or whatever. Do you have any good questions for teachers to ask themselves post-lesson about specifically how the Oracy went in their lessons? Is there any good self-reflective techniques they could be asking themselves?
Yeah, things like, how do I know there was an effective discussion took place? Did I see every student participate? How did I make sure that every student was engaged in that discussion or was able to express their ideas? Were there students who didn't speak? Because that's a really powerful tool as well. So sometimes what I do is I'll have my seating plan, and every lesson I'll tick off which student spoke. And that way I know who had an opportunity to speak and who didn't, because I don't want any student to feel like they haven't had an opportunity to speak. And that's why I think preparing the lesson in advance to give every single student an opportunity to share their ideas, whether that's in pairs, in groups, or whole class, is really important and really valuable as well, because it shows them that their voice matters. And I think things like, how did that discussion then lead to as an English teacher, I would ask things like great writing or great implementation. Like, were they able to then apply that discussion? Like, they were able to talk about that particular theory. Could they show it to me in practice, for example? Like, they were able to say thought tracking. They could discuss and express what thought tracking is in drama. Were they able to then implement it in their kind of drama piece or in their piece? I used to be a drama teacher. I've forgotten everything. But, that sort of kind of practical element. Because I think, again, sometimes we think Oracy is just for English. But actually, it's not about that. It's about, were they able to take that, able to articulate the ideas and then implement it? In English, we'd say implementing it in writing. Like, could I see it expressed in their writing? Because that's ultimately how they are, unfortunately, kind of assessed, right? In GCSE, at the end, that's how they're assessed. But ultimately, from year 7, even for primary school, all the way to that point, we should be helping them build those skills.
I think what's really useful with that technique as well is also kind of building on that, is if you've noticed you haven't spoken to a student or a group of students, or you weren't happy with maybe what that student was saying, you didn't challenge it in class, get that thing on a post-it note and then put that in next week's diary. Or if you're purely online, go to your next week lesson plan and just put a note on, I didn't speak to X, Y, Z, whatever. because it's easy to reflect upon a lesson and then maybe not change something or forget that reflection. But if you put it in kind of your plan for next week, so go straight to next week in your diary and write, make sure I'm talking to X, Y, or Z about their lesson. That's where you can kind of make sure you're building upon those reflections, not just having those reflections and then making the same mistake, which I've definitely been guilty of in the past. Mike, if you're sitting down maybe with a teacher and they're talking about a lesson that they've had and they're aware the Oracy maybe wasn't what they wanted, are there any kind of questions you would ask as like the coach to kind of help them develop further or kind of guide themselves?
I guess, what strategies have you used? What was successful? What would you change if you're doing it again? But I'm really big on doing live reflections or doing something that allows you to reflect really quickly and really easily. So annotated seating plans for me is every time, having a conversation with a student, just a little tick next to their name on the seating plan or a symbol or something. Or when you see a student give a really good response, a little symbol on your seating plan, and then just being able to sit down, because we don't always have time. If you're on 5-6 period day, CPD after school, you've got to go home and do things straight away after that. When you reflect on these lessons properly, you're not writing down your diary after every single lesson, unfortunately. But having that seating plan in front of you means in 30 seconds you can look at it and go, highlight a couple of kids' names or just put a symbol next to the names. Right, next time I pick up this seating plan for my class, bang, I know I'm going to speak to these students next lesson. I want to make sure these students have an opportunity to express their thoughts. So for me, that's a really, really successful strategy that is implementable whether you are teaching a 5-6 period day or if you're a trainee teacher and you've just got one lesson that day and you want to be able to reflect.
So hopefully, listeners, we've got a few things there that you can kind of bring in over time. If I was to say, Yamina, and I'll throw this at you without really discussing this at all, like, if a teacher comes to you and says, like, this is something I want to do tomorrow, I've just listened to the podcast, I'm going to go into my lesson, ready to go, this is what I want to do. What's the kind of a really quick thing they can do with maybe out that planning or really kind of reflect time, something they can just walk into their next and go, I'm going to do this right away? Is there anything?
I would say kind of had some discussion is quite an easy thing to do. I know like you could do it without resource because you could just say, you're going to start a discussion, you're going to build it, and you could write down the sentence stems. But I think, as I said earlier, build on the things that you already know. Think, pair, share, turn and talk. They're strategies that give students opportunity to speak. That should be in every single lesson, I think, because every single lesson, students should have an opportunity to share their voice, share their ideas and their thoughts, and up-level it by having an accountability to that questioning, accountability to that talk. So think, pair, share, every person, and I suggest this to everybody, whenever you take over a new class, whenever there's a new seating plan, tell them, right, you've got 10 seconds to allocate yourselves a pair. Are you person A, person B? Go. And like literally you've done that. So, and it only changes when there's a new seating plan. And that's quite easy to do. It doesn't need any resources, doesn't need anything additional. But it gives accountability. And then when you are doing the cold calling or when you are taking feedback, you're not asking them for their feedback. You're asking them for what their partner said. So what's the thing that your partner shared? Because then you really know if they've listened and they've actually listened to understand, because sometimes they'll be like, yeah, no, madam, I'll miss out. I don't know what they said, to be honest. I can't say it. And then they'll turn to the person and then that student will then share. And that's quite a quick way of, without any resources really, of upskilling or up-leveling the strategies that you're already doing.
It's exactly the note I was just writing down. I love that idea of it, like, this is something you want to bring in. Well, pick a strategy that you're confident with and you really know. Think, pair, share being a really nice example. And then just think about how you can turbocharge it, bring it up and just add these little extra bits in. And then you'll see the results. You get that sense of achievement. So you're motivated to do. And then you might go, well, that worked so well. Imagine if I actually planned it really well and I kind of go in with it. So I love that idea of taking something you're confident with. Mike, anything to kind of add there? Kind of that teacher comes to you and says, I want to do something tomorrow. What can I do?
Go and buy Yamina's book.
So kind. Thank you.
Good book. It's a great starting point.
I now want to share one more strategy, but I don't know.
Go on, Yamina, go for it. Go.
But I was thinking, because vocabulary is one thing that everybody knows about. Like, I think most schools have taught tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 vocabulary to the death now. I think everyone's very much aware, but the idea of choral rehearsal, because the kids love it. Whatever year group they're in, they love learning ambitious words or suave words, as Ros Wilson calls it. You teach them an ambitious word like malevolent or whatever, but you get them to use it in context of whatever the topic is. So, for example, I might teach them words like vindictive, versus merciful whenever when I'm talking about Merchant of Venice and Shylock. But the starter activity is, here's 2 words, here's what they mean, here's me using it in a sentence, now you say it, I say it, you say it, and then they say it, and then they have to do like different gestures with it. I love it. They love it so much. And then you say, right, discuss, is Shylock vindictive or, merciful? What is, and then they have to use the word in action. 1, it's using explicitly teaching vocabulary. 2, it's practicing pronunciation. And 3, it's then using it in context and discussing it. So yeah, that's one of my favorite strategies I always forget to talk about.
Not being scared of difficult, scary words. Like I've seen it a lot in kind of maths where, I don't want to teach them this scary big word, so I'll do something else. And then it's kind of it just doesn't work. Like, be ambitious with language. And if you break it down and explain what that word means, have examples, have non-examples, then it's great when you hear the students using the proper words, because then they'll speak those proper words, they hear those proper words, they read those words correctly. So I absolutely agree there. Be exciting with your language, and students will pick up on that, when you get to use some really exciting words. Mike, I assume P has loads of exciting words.
Yes,
I
it
think
does.
that's in a really exciting terminology for a badminton volley. I don't know.
Well, volley would be the incorrect term. So yes, no. Every sport is going to have terminology, and a word in one sport might be different in another sport. It might mean something slightly differently. So yeah, highlighting those key words and getting them to use in a context is really important.
Yamina, we are so grateful for your time. Thank you so much for finally getting you properly on TandTeaching. It's been great.
Thank you. It's been so much fun.
If Mike tried to plug the book, but Yamina, you've got a book. Tell us about the book. Yeah. Tell us about blogs. Tell us where people can go out and find more about Yamina. Because if someone in education maybe doesn't know anything about Yamina, please tell us where can people go.
Yes, I have a book. Thanks, Mike. I wrote a book that's called Thriving Your First Years of Teaching. And it's the book that I wish I had when I first started teaching 15 years ago. And it really breaks down those kind of implicit, I would say, assumptions that teachers make about teaching and think that everybody else knows what all of those words, fancy words mean and know how to call in sick. And it goes from all the way from as ridiculous as how do I call in sick? Not that I'm encouraging it, to, how do I apply for my next job, or what's my vision for my career and how do I ascertain that and how do I then make it happen? So it goes from really small things to kind of big things, but it's kind of, making the implicit very explicit so that they can thrive and not just survive. And I would say, because other people have said, I don't think it's just for ECTs. It's literally I hope it's useful for everybody, for mentors, for teachers and leaders as well. And yes, I have a website apparently. It's literally yaminabibi.co.uk. It's very simple. Type it in, you'll find it, but you'll find more information on some of the stuff that I'm doing at the moment that's outside of schools. But yeah, thank you so much for having me on.
No, it's our absolute pleasure. People, please go and check out. But I think, as you said, it's a great book to have if you're kind of coaching and working with new teachers, because it gives you that insight of not making assumptions about what they might be thinking. I think that's what's really nice about it. But honestly, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on TandTeaching. So thank you so much for coming on. Listeners, I hope those 3 episodes have been really useful for you. You've got an overview of Oracy and education. You've got what it means in kind of the school level. And then we've spoken a lot about this episode about what you can do in your classrooms. And also, I feel I should say thank you, Mike. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Arthur. And thanks to the listeners.
We'll see you next time on TandTeaching.
Are you searching for teacher CPD that leads to change, illuminates best practice and inspires your staff? Well, look no further. InnerDrive's Teacher CPD Academy is just what you need. The Teacher CPD Academy now also includes our Teaching Unpacked series, with Doug Lamoff exploring and analysing what great teaching looks like in the classroom. Email us now at tnt@innerdrive.co.uk to grab a free trial. That's tnt@innerdrive.co.uk.